The marble floors of the Whitmore mansion echoed with the sound of expensive heels, but Maya Chun had learned to walk silently through the service corridors. At 19, she had perfected the art of invisibility, slipping through shadows while the wealthy elite above lived their glittering lives, completely unaware of the girl who prepared their meals in the basement kitchen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But invisibility has a way of shattering when you least expect it. And for Maya, that moment came on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening when she accidentally collided with the one person she was never supposed to meet. The Whitmore estate stretched across 40 acres of prime Connecticut countryside, its Gothic spires piercing the gray October sky like accusations. Maya had called this place home for 6 years, ever since her mother Elena secured the position as head chef to the Whitmore family. The pay was exceptional, the living quarters in the staff wing were comfortable, and the work was steady. For a single mother who had emigrated from the Philippines with nothing but culinary dreams and a teenage daughter, it was everything they needed. Maya understood the rules from day one. Staff children were tolerated but not seen. They attended the local public school, completed their homework in the staff quarters, and stayed far away from the main house during family events. The boundary between their world and the Whitmores was as clear as the heavy oak door that separated the service areas from the grand foyer. Mrs. Helena Whitmore made the expectations crystal clear during Maya's first week. "Your daughter seems like a lovely girl, Elena, but I trust you understand that discretion is paramount in this household. We frequently entertain important guests, and any distractions would be most unwelcome." Elena had nodded respectfully, her hands clasped behind her back. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Maya knows to keep to the staff areas." And Maya had kept to those areas religiously. While her mother crafted elaborate 7-course meals for dinner parties that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, Maya studied at the small desk in their quarters, her textbooks spread across the surface as classical music and laughter drifted down from the floors above. She became an expert at mapping the house's rhythms. Tuesday evenings meant intimate dinners for 8 in the formal dining room. Thursday afternoons brought the ladies' auxiliary meetings in the sunroom. Saturday nights were reserved for grand entertaining, sometimes 50 guests or more, transforming the mansion into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Maya's world existed in the spaces between these events. She would slip through the service corridors during school hours, grab quick meals in the staff kitchen while the family dined upstairs, and retreat to her room when the sounds of conversation and clinking crystal grew too loud. But boundaries, Maya discovered, have a way of blurring when you're 19 and curious about the world beyond your designated space. It started innocently enough. Maya had always been an exceptional student, particularly in literature and history. Her teachers at Millbrook Public High School recognized her potential early on, encouraging her to pursue college despite her family's financial circumstances. She spent hours crafting scholarship applications and college essays, dreaming of universities far from the service corridors and staff quarters that had defined her teenage years. Whitmore Library became her secret refuge, located on the second floor of the East Wing. It was rarely used by the family. Mrs. Whitmore preferred her romance novels and society magazines, while Mr. Whitmore's reading was limited to financial reports and golf magazines. Their twin daughters, Stephanie and Samantha, were away at boarding school most of the year and showed no interest in the room's floor-to-ceiling shelves. When they were home, Maya discovered the library by accident during her sophomore year. She had been looking for her mother, who was consulting with Mrs. Whitmore about menu planning, when she took a wrong turn in the maze of corridors. The heavy mahogany door stood slightly ajar, revealing shelves lined with leather-bound volumes that seemed to glow in the afternoon, sunlight streaming through tall windows. She intended to leave immediately, But the sight of a first-edition Dickens collection stopped her in her tracks. Maya had been writing her junior-year thesis on Victorian literature, relying on worn paperbacks from the school library and whatever she could access online. Here, within arm's reach, were pristine copies of novels she had only read in cheap reprints. That first visit lasted only 10 minutes, but it was enough to plant a seed. Maya began timing her movements through the house, learning when the library would be empty. She would slip in during the family's dinner hours, settling into the window seat with whatever novel or biography had caught her attention. The library became her sanctuary, a place where she could forget about service corridors and invisible boundaries. Surrounded by thousands of books, Maya felt connected to something larger than her prescribed role in the Whitmore household. She was careful, always returning books to their exact positions, never leaving any trace of her presence. For 2 years, this delicate balance worked perfectly. Maya maintained her academic excellence while respecting the invisible lines that governed her existence in the mansion. She had her secret refuge, her mother had job security, and the Whitmore family remained blissfully unaware that the cook's daughter was quietly borrowing from their personal collection. Everything changed on the evening of October 15th. Maya had been accepted to Columbia University on a full scholarship, but she hadn't told her mother yet. The acceptance letter lay hidden beneath her mattress, a secret too precious and terrifying to share. How could she explain to Elena that she wanted to leave their comfortable situation for the uncertainty of college life in New York City? How could she voice dreams that seemed to stretch so far beyond their current reality? That Tuesday evening, Maya sought solace in the library. She had been reading Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence, drawn to its themes of social boundaries and forbidden desires. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, the cook's daughter, secretly reading about New York's Gilded Age, elite while hiding in a mansion that could have been lifted from Wharton's pages. The rain had been falling steadily all day, turning the October afternoon into something gray and melancholy. Maya settled into her usual spot by the window, watching water streak down the glass as she lost herself in Wharton's prose. The house was quieter than usual. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore had driven to Hartford for a business dinner, and the staff had been given lighter duties for the evening. Maya should have heard the footsteps in the corridor. She should have noticed the change in the house's atmosphere that always preceded a family member's presence. But she was completely absorbed in her reading, unaware that anything had shifted until the library door swung open with a soft creak. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was." The voice stopped mid-sentence. Maya looked up from her book to find herself staring at a young man she had never seen before, yet somehow recognized immediately. He had the same dark hair as Mr. Whitmore, the same strong jawline, but his eyes held a warmth that was distinctly his own. He was tall, probably in his early 20s, wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater that suggested he was comfortable in this house, but not bound by its formalities. "You must be Maya," he said, his initial surprise giving way to something that might have been curiosity. "I'm James Whitmore." Maya's heart stopped. She knew that name, had heard Mrs. Whitmore mention it in passing conversations with Elena, the oldest son, the one who had been studying abroad for the past 3 years, the heir who was supposed to take over the family's business empire, but had instead chosen to pursue graduate studies in literature at Oxford. "I'm sorry," Maya stammered, closing the book and starting to rise from the window seat. "I shouldn't be here. I was just, please don't go." The words came quickly, almost urgently. James stepped into the room but kept his distance, as if sensing that Maya was poised for flight. "I've been wondering who's been reading my books." Maya's cheeks flushed red. "I always put them back exactly where I found them. I never damaged anything, I promise." "I wasn't accusing you of damage." James's voice was gentle, amused even. "I was curious about someone with such excellent taste. You've been working your way through the entire American literature section, haven't you?" And you have a particular fondness for the female authors. Maya stared at him, unsure how to respond. How had he noticed? How long had he been aware of her presence in his family's library? I got back from England 2 weeks ago. James continued, moving to the shelf nearest the window and running his finger along the spine of a book. I always check this room first when I come home. It's my favorite place in the house. I started noticing that certain books were being moved, just slightly, but enough for someone who knows every inch of these shelves. He pulled a slim volume from the shelf and held it up. Zora Neale Hurston. Their eyes were watching God. It was exactly 1 inch to the left of where I always keep it. And this morning, I found the Age of Innocence turned slightly outward, as if someone had been in a hurry to return it. Maya's face burned with embarrassment. She had been so careful, or so she thought. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have been coming here. I'll never. Why are you apologizing? James interrupted, his tone genuinely puzzled. Do you think I'm angry that someone has been appreciating these books? Most of them haven't been touched in years. My parents see this room as decoration, not a living library. He moved closer, and Maya caught a whiff of something that might have been expensive cologne mixed with the scent of rain. I'm curious about you, Maya Chen, the girl who sneaks into libraries to read Edith Wharton by lamplight. Tell me, what did you think of Newland Archer? The question was so unexpected, so genuinely interested, that Maya found herself answering before she could think better of it. I think he was a coward disguised as a gentleman. He had every privilege, every opportunity to choose love over convention, but he let society make his decisions for him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. James smiled, and Maya felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear of being caught. That's exactly what I thought when I first read it, though I've come to have more sympathy for him over the years, because you understand what it's like to disappoint people who have expectations. Maya asked, then immediately regretted the boldness of the question, but James didn't seem offended. Instead, he looked at her with something that might have been admiration. Exactly. Though I suspect you understand that better than I do. They stood in silence for a moment, the rain continuing its steady rhythm against the windows. Maya knew she should leave, should retreat to the safety of the service corridors where she belonged. But something about James Whitmore made her want to stay, to continue this conversation that felt more real than anything she had experienced in months. What are you reading? James asked, nodding toward the book still clutched in Maya's hands. The same book, Maya admitted. I was rereading the scene where Ellen Olenska returns to New York. I keep thinking about how she navigates between two worlds, never fully belonging to either one. James studied her face with an intensity that made Maya's heart race. And you relate to that feeling. It wasn't a question, and Maya didn't treat it as one. I think everyone who's ever felt caught between worlds can relate to Ellen Olenska. Even the cook's daughter? The words hung in the air between them. Maya waited for the familiar sting of being reduced to her circumstances, for the reminder that she was speaking above her station. But James's voice held no condescension, only genuine curiosity. Especially the cook's daughter, Maya replied. Quietly, James moved to the window where Maya had been sitting, looking out at the rain-soaked grounds. I've spent the last 3 years at Oxford, studying literature with some of the most brilliant professors in the world. But I don't think any of them could have given me the insight you just shared about Ellen Olenska. Maya found herself moving closer to the window, drawn by something in his voice that sounded like loneliness. Your parents must be proud that you're getting such an excellent education. James laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. My parents are counting the days until I finish my degree and come home to take over the family business. They see my studies as an expensive delay, not an achievement. And what do you see them as? Freedom, James answered immediately. The freedom to think about something other than profit margins and acquisition strategies. The freedom to believe that literature and art matter as much as quarterly reports. Maya understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. But freedom has an expiration date when other people depend on you. James turned to look at her directly. Your mother? She worked so hard to get this position. The security it provides, the stability. I can't do anything that might jeopardize that. What would jeopardize it? The question was innocent enough, but Maya heard layers of meaning beneath it. What would jeopardize her mother's position? Being caught in the family library. Engaging in conversations with the heir to the Whitmore fortune. Allowing herself to feel whatever was building between her and James in this rain-soaked room, full of books and possibilities. This, Maya said simply, gesturing to the space between them. This conversation, my being here at all. James was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was soft but determined. What if I told you that? This is the most genuine conversation I've had since returning from England. What if I said that in 10 minutes, you've given me more to think about than 3 years of academic discussions? Maya's heart was beating so fast she was sure James could hear it. I'd say that you've been talking to the wrong people. Or maybe I've been talking to the right person all along, just never had the chance to meet her. The implication in his words was clear, and Maya felt herself standing at the edge of something that could change everything. She could make an excuse, return the book to its proper place, and disappear back into the service corridors where she belonged. She could preserve the careful balance that had kept her mother's job secure and their lives stable, or she could stay a few minutes longer, continue this conversation that felt like discovering the secret room in a house she thought she knew completely. Maya, James said, and her name sounded different in his voice than it ever had before. Would you like to have coffee sometime? Not here, not in the house. Somewhere where you can just be yourself, not the cook's daughter. The offer hung between them like a bridge Maya could either cross or burn. She thought about her acceptance letter to Columbia, hidden beneath her mattress like a secret too dangerous to voice. She thought about her mother, working late in the kitchen to perfect recipes for people who would never know her name. She thought about boundaries and expectations and the careful choreography of knowing your place in the world. And then she thought about the way James had asked her opinion of Newland Archer, as if her thoughts mattered. The way he had listened to her insights about Ellen Olenska without condescension or surprise. The way he was looking at her now, as if she were someone worth knowing rather than someone to be tolerated. I'd like that, Maya heard herself say, the words coming from some brave part of herself that she hadn't known existed. James smiled, and Maya felt the careful boundaries of her world shift just slightly, creating space for something new and terrifying. And wonderful. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the Whitmore estate, washing the October evening clean and carrying away the certainty that had governed Maya's life for 19 years. In its place was something far more dangerous and infinitely more precious possibility. The coffee shop James suggested was a small place called the Reading Nook, tucked between a vintage bookstore and a used record shop in downtown Millbrook. Maya had passed it countless times on her way to school, but never ventured inside. It seemed like the kind of place where people who didn't worry about money spent lazy afternoons discussing philosophy and art. When Maya arrived on Thursday at 4 o'clock, James was already seated at a corner table, 2 steaming mugs before him. He stood when he saw her, and Maya noticed he looked different outside the mansion's formal atmosphere. More relaxed, more himself. I wasn't sure how you liked your coffee, he said, gesturing to the drinks. So I got you a cappuccino and asked for extra foam. You strike me as someone who would appreciate the artistry. Maya slid into the chair across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. You were right. Though I have to admit, most of my coffee experience comes from the industrial machine in our staff kitchen. Well, then this is your introduction to what coffee can be when it's treated as more than just caffeine delivery. Maya took a sip and couldn't suppress a small smile. The coffee was rich and complex, nothing like the bitter brew she was accustomed. Tio, it's perfect. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the afternoon light filtering through the shop's large windows. Maya found herself studying James's face, noticing details she had missed in the library's dim lighting. There was a small scar near his left temple, and his hand showed traces of ink stains that suggested he still wrote by hand rather than relying entirely on computers. "Tell me about Columbia," James said suddenly, causing Maya to nearly choke on her coffee. "How did you—" "I may have done some detective work," James admitted, looking slightly sheepish. "I asked Mrs. Patterson at the post office if any exciting mail had been delivered to the estate recently. She mentioned seeing several university envelopes addressed to you over the past few months." Maya set down her mug, her cheeks burning. "Mrs. Patterson has a big mouth. She's also incredibly proud of you. She spent 10 minutes telling me about your academic achievements and how you're the smartest student Millbrook High has ever produced." The pride in James's voice when he relayed Mrs. Patterson's words made Maya's chest tighten with emotion. "I haven't told my mother yet. Why not?" Maya stared into her coffee, searching for words to explain the complex mix of guilt, fear, and excitement that had kept Columbia a secret. "Because once I tell her, it becomes real. And once it's real, I have to make a choice that might hurt the person I love most." James leaned forward, his expression serious. "What kind of choice?" "Whether to stay and help maintain the security we've built or leave and pursue something that might be completely selfish." Maya met his eyes. "My mother sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. How can I take the biggest opportunity and use it to leave her behind? Have you considered that staying might be the thing that actually hurts her?" The question caught Maya off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean that mothers who sacrifice for their children's opportunities usually do it because they want those children to have choices they never had. If you don't take advantage of what she's given you, haven't you made her sacrifices meaningless?" Maya had never thought of it that way, but James's words resonated with a truth she had been avoiding. "You sound like you speak from experience." "In reverse," James said quietly. "My parents have given me every privilege, every opportunity. But they've also decided how I should use them. They've never asked what I want or what would make me happy. They've simply assumed that wanting anything other than the family business would be ungrateful." "And what do you want?" James was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in slow circles on the table. "I want to teach literature, maybe creative writing. I want to spend my days with books and students who are excited about ideas. I want to write, even if it's just ease that 12 people read." "That sounds wonderful." "It sounds impractical," James corrected. "It sounds like throwing away a fortune to play with words." Maya studied his face, seeing the conflict there that mirrored her own internal struggle. "What if we're both overthinking this? What if the people who love us actually want us to be happy more than they want us to be safe?" "That's a beautiful theory," James said with a wry smile. "But it requires a level of faith I'm not sure I possess. Then maybe we need to find it together." The words slipped out before Maya could stop them, and she felt exposed in their aftermath. But James didn't look uncomfortable. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I'd like that," he said simply, the touch of his fingers against hers sent electricity through Maya's entire body. This was dangerous territory, she knew. Every rational part of her mind was screaming warnings about the impossibility of what seemed to be developing between them. But sitting in this cozy coffee shop, with James looking at her like she was someone worth knowing and cherishing, Maya found it hard to listen to rational warnings. "Tell me about Oxford," she said. Needing to shift the conversation to safer ground, James's face lit up as he described his years in England. He painted vivid pictures of ancient libraries and passionate debates that lasted until dawn. He told her about professors who treated literature like a living, breathing thing, and classmates from around the world who brought different perspectives to familiar texts. "There's this pub near Christchurch where all the graduate students gather on Friday nights," James said, his voice warm with memory. "We'd argue about everything from Chaucer to contemporary poetry, and somehow those arguments felt more important than anything happening in the so-called real world." "It sounds like you found your people," Maya observed. "I did. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who understood why books matter, why stories can change how we see ourselves and the world." James's expression grew wistful. "Coming back here has been like learning to breathe different air." Maya understood that feeling intimately. "Is that why you were in the library that night? Looking for that same feeling?" "Maybe, or maybe I was. Looking for proof that there were still people in this world who saw books as more than decoration." "And did you find proof?" James's eyes met hers directly. "I found something better. I found someone who sees literature the way I do, who understands that stories aren't just entertainment, but ways of understanding what it means to be human." The intensity in his voice made Maya's heart race. "James... I know this is complicated," he said quickly. "I know there are obstacles and expectations, and a dozen reasons why this might be impossible. But Maya, in 3 days you've given me more insight and genuine conversation than I've had in months. You make me remember why I fell in love with literature in the first place." Maya felt tears pricking at her eyes. "You don't really know me. You know the girl who borrows books from your library and has opinions about fictional characters. I know the girl who taught herself to walk silently through corridors so she wouldn't disturb other people's comfort. I know the girl who got into Columbia on her own merit and is too selfless to celebrate her achievement. I know the girl who sees Ellen Olenska's struggle between worlds because she lives that struggle every day." The accuracy of his observations took Maya's breath away. "How can you see all that?" "Because I recognize it," James said softly. "Different circumstances, same feeling of being caught between who you're supposed to be and who you actually are." Maya realized they were still holding hands across the table, and she made no move to pull away. "This is crazy, isn't it? We've known each other for 3 days. 3 days and 2 years. James corrected. "I've been getting to know you through your book choices for 2 years. The Maya who reads Zora Neale Hurston and Virginia Woolf and keeps coming back to stories about women who refuse to accept the limitations other people place on them." "You really noticed all that?" "I noticed everything. The way you always chose books about people who dared to want more than their circumstances suggested they should have. The way you gravitated towards stories about crossing boundaries and challenging expectations." James squeezed her hand gently. "You've been preparing for Columbia your whole life, Maya. Not just academically, but emotionally. You've been reading about brave women who made impossible choices, because part of you always knew you'd have to make impossible choices too." Maya stared at him, struck by the realization that he might be right. Her literary choices hadn't been random. They had been a form of preparation, a way of imagining possibilities beyond her prescribed role. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," James admitted. "But I'd like to find out. Would you be willing to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere nicer than this. Somewhere that acknowledges how special you are." Maya's first instinct was to say no, to retreat to the safety of boundaries and expectations. But then she thought about Ellen Olenska, about all the literary heroines who had faced impossible choices and chosen courage over comfort. "Yes," she heard herself say. "But James, you need to understand something. I can't be your rebellion against your family's expectations." And I can't be your way of proving to yourself that you're different from other rich kids." James looked taken aback by her directness. "Is that what you think this is?" "I think it could be, even if you don't mean it to be. I need to know that. You see me as Maya, not as a symbol of authenticity or a way to irritate your parents." James was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "You're right to call me out on that possibility. But Maya, if I wanted to rebel against my parents or prove something to myself, there would be easier ways to do it. This," he gestured between them, "this feels like the hardest thing I've ever wanted to pursue." "Why?" "Because for the first time in my life, I'm risking something that actually matters to me. Not my parents' approval or society's expectations, but my own happiness." Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she hadn't realized she was building beginning to crumble. "Your happiness matters to you more than convenience?" "My happiness with you matters to me more than anything else I can think of right now." The simple honesty in his statement nearly undid Maya completely. She had spent so many years being practical, being careful, being grateful for what she had rather than wanting more. But James was looking at her like she was worth wanting more for, worth taking risks for. "Dinner tomorrow sounds lovely," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. James smiled, and Maya felt like she was seeing the sun after a long winter. "I'll pick you up at 7. And Maya, wear whatever makes you feel most like yourself. I want to see you, not some version you think I want to see." As they left the coffee shop together, Maya caught their reflection in the window. They looked like any young couple beginning something new and exciting. But Maya knew the truth was more complicated than appearances suggested. They were two people from different worlds, each carrying expectations and obligations that made their connection seem impossible, yet walking beside James as they moved toward their separate cars, Maya felt something she had never experienced before, the intoxicating possibility that maybe, just maybe, impossible things sometimes happened anyway. That night, Maya lay in her narrow bed in the staff quarters, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had changed in the span of a few days. Above her, she could hear the sounds of the Whitmore family's evening routine. Television programs, phone conversations, the general bustle of people who never had to think about being quiet or invisible. For the first time since moving to the estate, Maya didn't resent those sounds. Instead, she found herself imagining what it would be like to exist in this house, as someone who belonged rather than someone who was tolerated. Not because she wanted the Whitmore's wealth or status, but because she was beginning to understand that belonging wasn't about money or position. It was about being seen and valued for who you actually were, and James Whitmore saw her. Not just the cook's daughter, not just the scholarship student, not just the girl who didn't fit into neat categories. He saw Maya Chun, in all her complexity and contradiction and possibility. Tomorrow night, she would find out if that was enough to build something real on, or if the weight of their different worlds would prove too much to overcome. Maya stood before her small closet, staring at the handful of dresses that comprised her formal wardrobe. James had said to wear whatever made her feel most like herself, but Maya wasn't entirely sure who that person was anymore. The girl who had lived quietly in the service corridors seemed to be transforming into someone braver, someone willing to reach for things that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. She settled on a deep burgundy dress that her mother had bought her for graduation. It was simple but elegant, the kind of piece that looked expensive despite its modest price tag. Maya had worn it only once before, to the senior awards ceremony where she had received recognition for academic excellence. Tonight felt like another kind of recognition, an acknowledgement that she was worth dressing up for, worth taking somewhere special. Elena looked up from her prep work when Maya entered the kitchen, her eyebrows rising in surprise. "Mia, you look beautiful. Where are you going?" Maya had been dreading this moment for 24 hours. I have dinner plans. With who? Elena's tone shifted, becoming more alert. In 6 years of living at the estate, Maya had never gone on a date, had barely shown interest in the boys at school who had tried to ask her out. James Whitmore. The words hung in the air like a confession. Elena set down her knife and turned to face her daughter fully, her expression unreadable. The son? Yes. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hands working automatically as she arranged vegetables on a cutting board. Maya recognized the rhythm. Her mother always cooked when she needed to think. Maya, Elena said finally, her voice careful and controlled. You understand that this is dangerous. I know it's complicated. No, Mia. Complicated is when the grocery order arrives late and I have to adjust the menu. This is dangerous. Elena's dark eyes met her daughter's. For both of us, Maya felt a familiar stab of guilt. Mama, I would never do anything to jeopardize your position here. It's not about my position anymore, Elena said softly. It's about your heart, rich boys. They don't marry girls like us, Maya. They have dinner with us, they charm us, they make us believe in fairy tales. But when it comes time to choose a wife, they choose someone from their own world. The words stung because Maya had thought them herself in her more cynical moments. But she also remembered the way James had looked at her in the coffee shop, the genuine respect in his voice when he talked about her dreams. What if he's different? Maya asked. Alana's expression softened with something that might have been pity. They're never different, Mia. Not when it matters. Before Maya could respond, the kitchen service bell chimed twice, the signal that someone from the main house needed to speak with staff. Elena glanced at the clock, frowning. It was unusual for the family to request anything at this hour. Stay here, Elena instructed, but Maya was already moving toward the service door. Maya, don't. But Maya was through the door and halfway down the corridor before her mother could finish the warning. She had spent 6 years being obedient, being invisible, being safe. Tonight, she was choosing something different. James was waiting in the service hallway, looking uncomfortable in his navy blazer and dress shirt. When he saw Maya, his face transformed with a smile that made her forget all her mother's warnings. You look incredible, he said, his voice carrying a note of wonder that seemed entirely genuine. Thank you. Maya was suddenly shy, hyper-aware of how intimate this felt despite the formal distance they were maintaining. I brought you something. James pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. I saw it today and thought of you. Maya unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a slim leather journal with her initials embossed in gold on the cover. The leather was soft and expensive, clearly handmade. For your writing, James explained. I noticed you taking notes in the margins of the library book sometimes. I thought you might like something that was entirely yours. Maya ran her fingers over the smooth cover, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. James, this is too much. It's not enough, he said. Simply, but it's a start. They drove to Rosewood, a restaurant in the next town that Maya had heard about, but never imagined visiting. The dining room was intimate and warm, with soft lighting and fresh flowers on every table. The maître d' greeted James by name and led them to a quiet corner table. Maya felt the eyes of other diners following them as they were seated. She wondered what they saw, a young couple on a date, or something more scandalous. Could they sense the transgression of boundaries, the crossing of invisible lines that governed who belonged with whom? You're thinking very seriously about something, James observed as they settled into their seats. I'm thinking about how strange this feels, Maya admitted. Being here, being seen in public with you. I keep expecting someone to tell me I don't belong. James leaned forward, his expression intense. You belong anywhere you choose to be, Maya. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Even your parents? The question hung between them like a challenge. James was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. My parents don't get to decide who I care about, he said finally. And they don't get to decide what makes me happy. But they can make things very difficult if they disapprove. Yes, James acknowledged. They can. Would that change how you feel about being here? Maya thought about it honestly. I don't know. I've never had to choose between what I want and what's safe before. And now? Now I'm starting to think that. Safety might be overrated, James smiled. That sounds like something Ellen Olenska would say. Ellen Olenska was fictional, Maya pointed out. Real people have real consequences to deal with. Real people also have real opportunities for happiness. The question is whether we're brave enough to reach for them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their waiter, and Maya was grateful for the distraction. She needed time to process James's words, to examine the way they made her heart race with equal parts excitement and terror. The meal was exquisite, courses of food that were as beautiful as they were delicious. Maya found herself relaxing as the evening progressed, drawn into conversations about books and dreams and the strange experience of feeling like you don't quite fit anywhere. Tell me about your writing, James said as they shared a dessert of chocolate souffle. What writing? Maya asked, surprised. The notes you make in books. The way you analyze characters and themes. That's not just academic work, Maya. That's the perspective of someone who understands storytelling from the inside. Maya felt her cheeks warm. I've never thought of myself as a writer. What do you think writers do? They observe human nature. They find patterns in behavior. They ask questions about why people make the choices they make. You do all of those things. In book margins, Maya protested. Not in actual stories, yet, James said with a smile. Have you ever tried writing fiction? Once, Maya admitted. In high school, I wrote a short story for English class about a girl who could only exist in the spaces between other people's lives. What happened to her? She learned to fly. James set down his spoon and looked at Maya directly. I'd like to read that story. It was silly teenage stuff. I doubt that. And even if it was, we all start somewhere. The question is whether you want to keep going. Maya realized that this was what she had been missing in all her college planning. She had focused so intensely on escaping her current circumstances that she hadn't thought deeply about what she wanted to create in place of them. At Columbia, she said slowly, I could take creative writing classes. You could, James agreed. Or you could start now. Tonight, in that journal I gave you. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Maya had spent so many years being practical, focusing on grades and scholarships and concrete paths to stability. The notion of pursuing something as impractical as creative writing felt like stepping off a cliff. What would I write about? She asked. What do you know? What do you see that other people miss? Maya thought about her years in the Whitmore mansion, watching the intricate social dynamics from her position in the margins. She thought about her mother's quiet dignity in the face of condescension, about the loneliness she sometimes glimpsed in Mrs. Whitmore's eyes, about the complexity of lives that seemed simple from the outside. I know about invisible people, she said quietly, about the lives that happen in the spaces between other people's stories. Then write about that, James encouraged. Write about the cook's daughter who sees everything and is seen by no one. Write about the way power works, the way class shapes every interaction, the way people learn to make themselves small to survive. Maya felt something stirring in her chest, an excitement she had never associated with her own potential. You really think I could do that? Write something worth reading? I think you've been doing it your whole life, James said. You just haven't been putting it on paper. As they left the restaurant, Maya felt transformed in some fundamental way. Not just by James's encouragement, though that had been powerful, but by the recognition of something in herself that she had never named before, a desire to create, to capture the truth of experiences that usually went unnoticed, They drove back toward the estate in comfortable silence, Maya clutching the leather journal like a talisman. When James pulled into the staff parking area behind the mansion, Maya realized the evening was ending and felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Thank you," she said as they sat in the darkness of the car. "For dinner, for the journal, for seeing something in me that I didn't know was there." "Thank you for letting me see it," James replied. "Maya, I want you to know that this isn't just some romantic whim for me. What I feel for you, what I see in you, it's real." Maya turned to face him in the dim light, filtering from the mansion's windows. "How can you be so sure? We've known each other for less than a week. Because in less than a week, you've made me remember who I am when I'm not trying to be what other people expect. You make me feel like the person I am at my best." Maya felt tears pricking at her eyes. "You do the same for me." James reached across the car and took her hand. "Then we're going to figure this out. Whatever obstacles we face, whatever complications arise, we're going to find a way." Maya wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the possibility of happy endings despite all the evidence suggesting they were impossible for girls like her. But sitting in the darkness with James's hand warm in hers, she found herself thinking that maybe Elena was wrong. Maybe some rich boys were different. Maybe some love stories refused to follow the expected script. As she walked back to the staff quarters, the leather journal pressed against her chest, Maya felt like she was carrying more than just a gift. She was carrying possibility, the radical notion that she might be someone worth writing about, someone worth taking risks for, someone worth loving exactly as she was. Behind her bedroom door, Maya opened the journal to the first page and wrote a single sentence. "The cook's daughter learned to fly, but first she had to believe she had wings." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in her life, Maya Chun was ready to begin. Maya's secret couldn't last forever, and it unraveled on a Tuesday morning in the most mundane way possible. Mrs. Helena Whitmore happened to be descending the main staircase at precisely the moment Maya emerged from the library. A copy of James's annotated Middlemarch tucked under her arm. Time seemed to freeze as their eyes met across the marble foyer. Mrs. Whitmore's gaze traveled from Maya's face to the book, then back again, her expression shifting from surprise to something considerably colder. "Miss Chun," Mrs. Whitmore's voice could have etched glass. "How interesting to find you in this part of the house during school hours." Maya's mouth went dry. "I was. You were in my library," Mrs. Whitmore interrupted, descending the remaining stairs with the measured pace of a predator. "Without permission. Taking books that don't belong to you." "I always returned them," Maya said quietly, knowing how pathetic the defense sounded. "That hardly addresses the fundamental issue of boundaries, does it?" Mrs. Whitmore stopped directly in front of Maya, close enough that Maya could smell her expensive perfume. "Tell me, Miss Chen, what other liberties have you been taking with me?" The question carried implications that made Maya's cheeks burn. How much did Mrs. Whitmore know? Had someone seen her with James? Had their dinner at Rosewood somehow reached the wrong ears? "I've only borrowed books," Maya insisted. "Nothing else." Mrs. Whitmore's smile was sharp as a blade. "I find that rather difficult to believe. You see, young women who feel entitled to help themselves to one thing they haven't earned often feel entitled to others." Maya felt anger flare in her chest. Hot and righteous. "I haven't taken anything I wasn't willing to give back." Improved? Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "How presumptuous of you to believe that your odd attention could improve anything in this house." Maya didn't mean. Both women turned to find James standing in the library doorway, his face pale but determined. Maya's heart sank. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid. "James," Mrs. Whitmore's voice warmed by precisely 1 degree. "How fortuitous. Perhaps you can explain why the help has been rifling through your personal collection." She hasn't been rifling through anything, James said, moving to stand beside Maya. I gave her permission to use the library. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You gave her permission? Without consulting your father or myself. I didn't realize I needed permission to share books with someone who appreciates them. Someone who appreciates them, Mrs. Whitmore repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling this situation? Maya could feel the conversation spiraling beyond her control. Mrs. Whitmore, please. This isn't James's fault. I should have asked permission before. You should have known your place, Mrs. Whitmore. Cut her off. But I suppose that's asking too much from someone who clearly wasn't raised to understand appropriate boundaries. James stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Mother, that's enough, is it? Mrs. Whitmore turned her attention fully to her son. Because from where I stand, it appears that someone has been taking advantage of your generous nature and your temporary infatuation with playing the democratic philanthropist. It's not an infatuation, James said firmly. And Maya hasn't taken advantage of anything. Mrs. Whitmore studied her son's face with the calculating gaze of someone reading a balance sheet. James, darling, surely you understand this little friendship has run its course. Miss Chun has school to attend, and you have responsibilities that require your full attention. What responsibilities? James demanded. Your father has arranged for you to begin transitioning into the company next month. There will be meetings, social obligations, expectations to fulfill. You won't have time for charitable reading programs. Maya felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. James hadn't mentioned anything about starting work at the family company. She looked at him, searching his face for confirmation or denial. I haven't agreed to anything, James said, but Maya heard the uncertainty in his voice. You haven't disagreed either, Mrs. Whitmore pointed out smoothly. And you know as well as I do that certain associations would be problematic for someone in your position. The word associations hung in the air like a slur. Maya felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller under the weight of Mrs. Whitmore's disapproval and the implications of her words. Maya isn't an association, James said. She's the cook's daughter, Mrs. Whitmore finished. And while I'm sure she's a perfectly nice girl within her own sphere, she is not appropriate company for the heir to the Whitmore fortune. Maya had heard enough. You're right, she said quietly, setting the copy of Middlemarch on the nearest table. I'm not appropriate company. I apologize for overstepping. Maya, don't. James reached for her arm, but Maya stepped back. It's fine. James, your mother is protecting what matters to your family. I understand that. But as Maya turned to leave, Mrs. Whitmore's voice stopped her cold. Actually, Miss Chun, I don't think you do understand. You see, this little situation has created a problem that extends beyond my son's temporary fascination. Maya turned back slowly. What kind of problem? The kind that requires a adjustment. Elena has done excellent work for us over the years, but I'm beginning to think that this position might not be the right fit for your family after all. The threat was delivered with surgical precision. Maya felt the blood drain from her face as the full implication hit her. Mrs. Whitmore wasn't just ending whatever was developing between Maya and James. She was threatening to destroy Elena's livelihood as punishment for her daughter's transgression. Please, Maya whispered. My mother has nothing to do with this. She doesn't even know about what exactly? Mrs. Whitmore's smile was predatory. About your unauthorized use of our library? About your friendship with my son? Or about whatever other liberties you've been taking? James stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Mother, you can't punish Elena for something she didn't do. Can't I? Mrs. Whitmore tilted her head. I can do whatever I feel is necessary to protect this family's interests. The question is whether Miss Chun is willing to be reasonable about this situation. Maya felt trapped between impossible choices. If she continued seeing James, her mother would lose her job. If she ended things now, Elena would be safe, but Maya would lose the first real happiness she had ever known. "What do you want me to do?" Maya asked, hating the defeat in her own voice. "I want you to remember your place," Mrs. Whitmore said simply. "I want you to focus on your studies and your future plans, which I understand include college in New York. How exciting for you. I want you to stop taking advantage of my son's kindness and my family's hospitality. And if I do that, Elena keeps her job? Elena keeps her job. You get to finish your senior year without disruption, and everyone moves forward appropriately." Maya looked at James, seeing the pain and frustration in his eyes. She wanted to be brave, wanted to fight for what they had found together. But she also thought about her mother in the kitchen below, working to create beautiful meals for people who would now see her as a liability. "I understand," Maya said quietly. "Excellent." Mrs. Whitmore's tone became brisk and businesslike. "James, your father is expecting you in his study at 10. You'll want to change into something more appropriate for discussing your future with the company." James didn't move. "Maya, this isn't over. We can figure this out." But Maya was already shaking her head. "Yes, it is. Your mother is right. I overstepped, and now I need to step back. That's not what I want. It's what needs to happen." Maya turned and walked toward the service corridor, each step feeling like a small death. Behind her, she could hear James arguing with his mother, their voices growing heated as distance muffled the words in the staff kitchen. Elena was preparing lunch for a board meeting scheduled for that afternoon. She looked up when Maya entered, immediately sensing the change in her daughter's demeanor. "What happened, Mia?" Maya collapsed into a chair at the small staff table, fighting back tears. "Mrs. Whitmore caught me coming out of the library." Elena's face went pale. And she made it very clear that my friendship with James ends now, or you lose your job." Elena set down her knife with trembling hands. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful, should have watched you more closely. This isn't your fault, Mama. I made these choices. I knew the risks." Elena moved to her daughter's side, stroking Maya's hair the way she had when Maya was small and needed comfort. "What did you tell her?" "That I understood. That I would step back." Maya wiped at her eyes angrily. "I told her what she wanted to hear. And James? James doesn't get a choice in this. His family owns his future, just like they own this house and everything in it." Elena was quiet for a moment, her hand still moving gently through Maya's hair. "Maybe it's for the best, Mia. Maybe this is the push you needed to focus on Columbia, on building your own life." Maya wanted to agree, wanted to find some silver lining in the wreckage of the morning. But all she could think about was the leather journal upstairs, filled with the beginnings of stories she had been brave enough to start writing only because James had believed in her potential. "He saw something in me that I didn't know was there," Maya said quietly. "He made me feel like I could be more than just the cook's daughter." "You are more than that," Elena said firmly. "You always have been. You don't need a rich boy to tell you that, but it felt good to hear it. I know, Mia. But feelings aren't always practical. And in our position, practical matters more than feelings." Maya nodded, understanding the truth of her mother's words, even as they cut deeply. She had allowed herself to forget, for a few precious days, that her life was governed by different rules than James's. She had imagined that love might be stronger than circumstance, that connection might matter more than class. Now she was reminded that fairy tales were called fairy tales for a reason. Real life required real choices, and real choices had real consequences for people who couldn't afford to take risks. That afternoon, Maya watched from her bedroom window as James's car disappeared down the estate's long driveway. He was going to his father's office, beginning the process of stepping into the role that had been designed for him since birth. Maya opened her journal and wrote, The cook's daughter learned that wings were a luxury she couldn't afford. Some cages are locked from the outside, but others we build ourselves, brick by careful brick, until we forget that we ever wanted to fly. It wasn't the ending she had hoped for, but it was the ending that protected the people she loved. And maybe, Maya thought as she closed the journal, that was its own kind of love story after all. 3 weeks passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Maya attended school, completed her assignments, and helped her mother in the kitchen when needed. To any outside observer, life at the Whitmore estate had returned to its proper order. The cook's daughter had remembered her place, and the heir was dutifully preparing to assume his responsibilities. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Maya caught glimpses of James through windows and doorways, always at a distance. That felt carefully orchestrated. He was thinner than before, his usual easy confidence replaced by something that looked like resignation. During the twice-weekly board meetings his father had insisted he attend, Maya would see him in expensive suits that seemed to hang on him like costumes for a role he didn't want to play. Elena pretended not to notice her daughter's unhappiness, but Maya caught her mother watching her with worried eyes during their quiet dinners in the staff quarters. The Columbia acceptance letter had finally been shared, bringing Elena to tears of pride and joy that felt bittersweet in the current circumstances. "New York will be good for you," Elena said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Fresh start, new people, new possibilities." Maya nodded, knowing her mother was right, but unable to summon enthusiasm for a future that felt more like escape than opportunity. 6 months, she said quietly. "I just have to get through 6 more months." What Maya didn't expect was for those 6 months to be interrupted by a crisis that would change everything once again. That it started with Mrs. Patterson calling the estate on a Thursday afternoon, her voice tight with urgency. Maya happened to be in the main kitchen when Elena answered the phone, so she heard both sides of the conversation that would alter the careful balance they had all been maintaining. "Elena, dear, I'm calling about your mother," Mrs. Patterson said. Maya's grandmother, Lola, lived in a small apartment in Hartford and had been struggling with her health for months. "She's had a fall, and the doctors are saying she needs surgery, hip replacement, they think." Elena's face went pale. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that she can't live alone anymore, at least not for the next few months. She's going to need someone to help her recover, help her with physical therapy." Maya watched her mother's shoulders sag under the weight of an impossible choice. Elena couldn't leave her position at the estate. They needed the income and the security. But she also couldn't abandon her mother during a medical crisis. "I'll figure something out," Elena told Mrs. Patterson. But Maya could hear the uncertainty in her voice. After Elena hung up, they sat in silence at the kitchen table, both understanding the gravity of the situation. Elena's salary was there. Lifeline, but Lola was family. There was no good choice, only different kinds of sacrifice. "I could defer Columbia for a year," Maya said quietly. "Stay and help with Lola while you keep working." "Absolutely not." Elena's voice was sharp with determination. "You're not giving up your future because of this family's problems. Then what do we do?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I asked Mrs. Whitmore for a leave of absence. Unpaid, probably, but maybe she'll hold the position for me." Maya's heart sank. They both knew how unlikely that was. Mrs. Whitmore didn't strike either of them as the type of employer who accommodated family emergencies, especially not for staff she was already viewing with suspicion. "Maybe I could talk to her," Maya suggested. "Explain the situation." "No," Elena said firmly. "You stay away from the Whitmores. I'll handle this myself." But Maya's decision was already made. That evening, after her mother had gone to bed, Maya made her way through the familiar corridors to the main house. She found Mrs. Whitmore in her private sitting room, reading a magazine with a cup of tea at her elbow. "Miss Chun," Mrs. Whitmore looked up with raised eyebrows. "How unexpected." I thought we had reached an understanding about boundaries. We did, Maya said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm here about my mother. What about her? Maya explained the situation with Lola, watching Mrs. Whitmore's expression remain carefully neutral throughout the recitation. When Maya finished, Mrs. Whitmore set down her magazine and regarded the younger woman with calculating eyes. I see, and you're here to ask for special accommodation. I'm here to ask for compassion, Maya corrected. My mother has worked for your family for 6 years without missing a single day. She's never asked for anything beyond her agreed-upon salary and benefits. And now she wants to abandon her responsibilities to care for an elderly relative. Maya felt anger flare in her chest. She wants to care for her mother who raised her and sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. Just like Elena has sacrificed for me. Double quotes. Mrs. Whitmore studied Maya's face with interest. How fascinating. You're willing to risk our agreement. For the sake of your mother's job security, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help my family, even if that means jeopardizing your own future. Because make no mistake, Miss Chun, if your mother leaves this position, you'll need to leave as well. The staff quarters come with the job. Maya had already considered this possibility. Without Elena's income and housing, Maya would need to find work immediately. Columbia would have to wait, possibly forever. I understand, Maya said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the arm of her chair. You know, Miss Chen, you continue to surprise me. Most young people your age are focused entirely on their own desires. But you seem willing to sacrifice everything for family loyalty. Maya didn't respond, unsure where Mrs. Whitmore was leading the conversation. I find myself in an interesting position, Mrs. Whitmore continued. You see, I've been observing my son over the past few weeks, and I must say, he's been rather subdued, distracted, not at all the focused future executive I had hoped to see. Maya's heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain calm. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because I suspect you might have insights into James's current state of mind. Maya chose her words carefully. I haven't spoken to James since our last conversation. No, but you've been watching him. Just as he's been watching you. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was sharp. Did you think I wouldn't notice the way my son stares out windows at precisely the times you cross the grounds too, and from school? Maya felt exposed, as if Mrs. Whitmore could see directly into her heart. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say that you'll do whatever is necessary to resolve this situation in a way that benefits everyone involved. What kind of resolution? Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward slightly. I'm prepared to offer your mother an extended leave of absence. Paid leave, with the guarantee that her position will be waiting when she returns. Maya stared at her in shock. Why would you do that? Because, Miss Chun, I've realized that sometimes the most effective way to end a distraction is to remove its source entirely. Your mother takes her leave. You move to Hartford to help with your grandmother's care, and my son is free to focus on his responsibilities without temptation. Maya felt the trap closing around her, elegant and inescapable. Mrs. Whitmore was offering exactly what Elena needed, but at the cost of everything Maya had begun to hope for. And if I refuse? Then your mother loses her job today. You both leave the estate immediately, and you figure out how to care for your grandmother without any safety net at all. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. Mrs. Whitmore was forcing her to choose between her family's immediate needs and any possibility of a future with James. How long? Maya asked quietly. 6 months. Long enough for your grandmother to recover, and long enough for my son to fully commit to his new role in the company. 6 months. Maya would miss the start of classes at Columbia, would have to defer for a year. By the time she was free to return to Connecticut, James would be deeply embedded in the family business, probably engaged to someone Mrs. Whitmore deemed appropriate. I need to discuss this with my mother." "Of course, but Miss Chun?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice stopped Maya at the door. "This offer expires tomorrow morning, and it's contingent on your complete disappearance from my son's life. No letters, no phone calls, no contact of any kind." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. In the staff kitchen, Elena was sitting at the table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at a piece of paper covered with numbers, calculating and recalculating finances that didn't add up to a solution. "Mama," Maya said gently, and explained Mrs. Whitmore's offer. Elena listened in silence, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. When Maya finished, Elena shook her head slowly. "Mia, this isn't generosity. This is manipulation. She's using our crisis to separate you from her son permanently." "I know," Maya said. "But it's also the only way to help Lola and keep your job." "What about Colombia? What about your dreams?" Maya sat down across from her mother, taking Elena's hands in hers. "Dreams can wait. Family can't." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "This is all my fault. If I had been stricter, if I had kept you away from their world, then I never would have learned that I could want more for myself," Maya interrupted. "Mama, James didn't create my dreams. He just helped me see them more clearly. And now you're giving them up. I'm postponing them." "There's a difference." Elena squeezed Maya's hands tightly. "You're sure about this?" Maya thought about James, about the way he looked at her like she was worth fighting for. She thought about the stories she had started writing, about the future she had begun to imagine for herself. Then she thought about Lola, alone and scared, in a hospital bed, and about Elena working herself to exhaustion, trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "I'm sure," Maya said, and meant it. That night, Maya wrote one final entry in the leather journal James had given her, the cook's daughter. "Learn that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go so the people you love can fly, even if you have to stay behind and tend the nest." Tomorrow she would pack her few belongings and leave for Hartford. She would spend her days helping her grandmother recover, and her evenings writing stories about the brief, bright moment when she had dared to reach for something impossible. And maybe, if she was very lucky, those stories would help her remember that even endings could be beginnings. If you were brave enough to turn the page. Maya never made it to Hartford. At 6 in the morning, as she was loading her single suitcase into Elena's car, James appeared at the staff entrance like a ghost materializing from the pre-dawn darkness. He was still in the clothes from the night before, an expensive suit now wrinkled and disheveled, his hair unkempt as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours. "Don't go," he said simply, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Maya froze, her hand still on the car door handle. Elena, who had been adjusting something in the backseat, straightened slowly and looked between her daughter and the young man who was supposed to be off limits. "James," Maya whispered, "you can't be here. If your mother sees—" "My mother has already seen plenty," James interrupted, stepping closer. "We had quite the conversation last night after she informed me of her generous offer to your family." Maya felt her stomach drop. "What did you say to her?" "I told her that if she thought she could manipulate you into disappearing by exploiting your grandmother's medical crisis, she had severely underestimated both your character and my determination." Elena moved protectively closer to her daughter. "Mr. Whitmore, with all due respect, this situation is more complicated than you understand. Maya is doing what's best for her family, is she?" James turned his attention to Elena, his voice gentle but firm. "Because from where I stand, it looks like Maya is being punished for caring about someone her family has deemed inappropriate." "It's not about appropriateness," Elena said carefully. "It's about reality. You live in different worlds." "Do we?" James pulled something from his jacket pocket, a folded piece of paper that looked official and important. "Because I've been doing some research into those different worlds, and I've discovered some interesting things." Maya stared at the document in James's hand. "What is that?" This is my resignation letter from Whitmore Industries. I submitted it to my father's office 3 hours ago. Elena's eyes widened. You quit your family's company? I never started working there, James corrected. I simply stopped pretending that I was going to. My father has been quite clear about his expectations, and I've been equally clear about my intentions. We've reached an impasse. Maya felt the world tilting around her. James, you can't just throw away your inheritance because of me. I'm not throwing it away because of you, James said. I'm choosing my own path because of me. You just helped me realize that I actually had choices to make. Where will you go? What will you do? James smiled, and for the first time in weeks, Maya saw traces of the man she had fallen in love with. I've been accepted to a doctoral program in comparative literature at Yale. Full funding. Teaching assistantship. The works. I applied months ago, before I met you, when I was still trying to figure out how to avoid the family business without causing a complete rupture. Maya stared at him in amazement. You never mentioned Yale. I never mentioned it because I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to accept. But watching you sacrifice your dreams for your family's security made me realize that I was doing the same thing in reverse, sacrificing my dreams for my family's expectations. Elena looked confused. I don't understand. How does this help? Maya's situation? Your grandmother still needs care, and I still need this job. James turned to Elena with an expression of deep respect. Mrs. Chun, I've taken the liberty of making some inquiries about your mother's situation. Did you know that Hartford General has an excellent rehabilitation program that's covered entirely by Medicare? Elena blinked. No, the social worker mentioned something, but I thought ... You thought you couldn't afford the copays and additional expenses, James continued gently. Which is understandable, given the financial pressure you've been under. But what if those concerns were removed from the equation? Maya felt a flutter of hope mixed with suspicion. James, what did you do? I established a small fund to cover any medical expenses not handled by insurance. Anonymous, of course, rooted through a charity that supports families dealing with elderly care crises. Elena's face flushed with pride and embarrassment. Mr. Whitmore, we can't accept charity. It's not charity, James said firmly. It's an investment in keeping families together while ensuring that talented young people don't have to choose between caring for their loved ones and pursuing their education. Maya shook her head slowly. Your mother will never allow this. She'd find a way to punish Elena for your defiance. She might try, James acknowledged. But she'll discover that I've anticipated that possibility as well. James pulled out another document, this one thicker than the first. This is a contract I had my lawyer draw up last night. It guarantees Elena's position for the next 2 years, with compensation equal to what she would have earned during the leave period, plus a significant bonus for her years of exemplary service. Elena stared at the contract like it might bite her. How is this possible? Your parents would never agree to this. My parents don't have a choice, James said quietly. You see, the Whitmore family has some interesting financial arrangements that depend on certain tax benefits and charitable deductions. If those arrangements were to be ... scrutinized by the appropriate authorities, it would be quite expensive for my family. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. James, you're not threatening your own parents, are you? I'm not threatening anyone, James said calmly. I'm simply ensuring that people who deserve security and respect receive both. My family's accountant was very helpful in explaining how charitable contributions and employee retention programs can provide excellent tax advantages. Elena looked at the contract, then at James, then at her daughter. This is too much. We can't accept something that's been coerced. Mrs. Chun, James said gently. With respect, Maya has spent her entire life accepting conditions that were coerced. She's been told where she can go, what she can aspire to, who she can care about, all because of circumstances beyond her control. If my family's wealth is going to exert influence over your lives, shouldn't that influence occasionally work in your favor? Maya felt tears beginning to blur her vision. What about Columbia? I've already missed the housing deadline, the orientation. Programs. James reached into his jacket one more time, producing what looked like a letter. I made some calls to the admissions office. Explained that you were dealing with a family medical emergency. They're holding your spot, and they've arranged for you to start with the spring semester cohort. Apparently, your application essay made quite an impression. Maya took the letter with trembling hands, scanning the official Columbia letterhead and the words that confirmed James's claims. This is real? It's real. The only question is whether you want it to be. Elena moved to stand beside her daughter, looking over Maya's shoulder at the letter. Mia, this is everything you dreamed of. But what about Lola? What about you? What about me? Elena asked gently. I have job security for the first time in 6 years. Your grandmother will have the best medical care available, and you get to become the woman I always knew you could be. Maya looked at James, seeing the hope and determination in his eyes. And us? What happens to us when you're at Yale and I'm at Columbia? We figure it out, James said simply. New Haven and New York are 2 hours apart. We email, we call, we visit when we can. We build something real based on who we actually are, not who our families expect us to be. Maya felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what James had done, the risks he had taken, the future he was offering. Your parents will hate you for this. My parents have spent my entire life making decisions based on what would benefit them most, James said. For once, I'm making decisions based on what feels right to me. And Maya, this feels right. Elena cleared her throat softly. Mia, I think we should go back inside and discuss this properly. Mr. Whitmore, would you like some coffee? You look like you haven't slept. James smiled gratefully. I'd love some coffee, Mrs. Chun. Thank you. As they walked back toward the staff quarters, Maya felt like she was in a dream. 24 hours ago, she had been preparing to sacrifice everything for her family's security. Now James was offering her a path that might allow her to have both love and dreams, family and future. In the small kitchen, Elena busied herself making coffee while Maya and James sat across from each other at the familiar table. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or second thoughts. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Once you submit that resignation, once you defy your parents completely, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, James replied. Maya, you taught me something I never learned in all my years of expensive education. You taught me that courage isn't about having power. It's about using whatever power you do have to protect the people and principles you care about. Elena set steaming mugs before them and settled into the third chair. Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask you something directly. Please call me James and ask me anything. Are you doing this because you love my daughter or because you love the idea of rebelling against your family? James considered the question seriously before answering. Mrs. Chun, I'm doing this because Maya has made me a better person than I was before I met her. She's challenged me to think beyond myself, to consider what kind of man I want to be rather than simply accepting what kind of man I was expected to become. Elena nodded slowly. And if things don't work out between you two, if this relationship ends someday, will you regret what you've given up? I might regret the pain of losing Maya, James said honestly. But I'll never regret choosing authenticity over convenience, or love over expectation. Those choices will define who I am, regardless of what happens between us. Maya reached across the table and took James's hand. And let's find out who we can become together. Outside, the sun was rising over the Whitmore estate, painting the October sky in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt like she could breathe freely, like the future held possibilities she was brave enough to reach for. The cook's daughter was finally ready to fly, and she wasn't flying alone. 5 years later, Maya stood in the kitchen of her small apartment near Columbia, stirring a pot of arroz caldo while rain drummed against the windows. The recipe was one Elena had taught her during those final months at the estate, before Maya had left for college and Elena had moved to a charming house in Hartford to be closer to Lola. The kitchen was tiny compared to the professional space where she had grown up, but it was hers. Every utensil, every spice, every cookbook had been chosen deliberately. Among the novels and literary journals crowding her counter sat her latest achievement, an advance copy of her debut collection of short stories titled Between Worlds. The apartment door opened with a familiar creak, followed by the sound of James shaking rain from his coat. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair damp and his arms full of grocery bags, looking exactly like what he had become, a teaching assistant working on his dissertation while Maya finished her senior year. "Something smells incredible," he said, setting down the groceries and moving to peer over her shoulder at the simmering pot. "Comfort food," Maya replied, leaning back against his chest. "I needed something that felt like home today." James wrapped his arms around her waist, understanding immediately. Today was the day Maya's book officially hit shelves, 5 years after she had written her first tentative sentence in the leather journal he had given her. The collection had garnered early praise from critics who noted the author's unique perspective on class, identity, and the invisible boundaries that shaped American life. "Nervous?" James asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Terrified," Maya admitted. "What if nobody connects with these stories? What if I've spent 5 years writing about experiences that only matter to me? Then you'll have spent 5 years becoming exactly the writer you were meant to be," James said firmly. "But Maya, that's not going to happen. These stories matter because they're true, because they give voice to experiences that are usually ignored." Maya turned in his arms, studying his face. 5 years had changed them both. James had grown into his role as an educator, finding the passion and purpose that had eluded him in his family's world of corporate expectations. Maya had learned to occupy space with confidence, to speak her truth without apology, to believe that her perspective had value. "Elena called earlier," Maya said. "She's driving down tomorrow for the reading at the bookstore. She wants to bring Lola if she's feeling up to it." James smiled. "How's your grandmother doing?" "Better than anyone expected." The physical therapy worked wonders, and being closer to Elena has been good for both of them. Maya ladled the arroz caldo into bowls, the familiar ritual calming her nerves. "Elena says Lola has been telling everyone at the senior center that her granddaughter is a published author. As she should. You've worked incredibly hard for this." They settled at Maya's small dining table, the same table where she had written many of the stories now being printed in bookstores across the country. Through the window, Maya could see the lights of the city stretching toward the horizon, full of stories waiting to be told. "James," Maya said quietly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had made different choices? If you had stayed with your family's company? If I had gone to Hartford that morning?" James considered the question seriously, as he always did when Maya asked him something important. "I think we would have lived smaller lives. Safer maybe, but smaller. We would have been versions of ourselves that fit other people's expectations instead of our own possibilities. Even if those expectations came with security and approval. Especially then. Maya, the hardest thing I've learned in graduate school isn't about literature or teaching. It's that most people spend their entire lives trying to become who they think they should be instead of discovering who they actually are." Maya nodded, thinking about the characters in her stories, people caught between worlds, struggling to define themselves outside the boxes others had built for them. Do you think your parents will ever understand why you made the choices you did? James was quiet for a moment. His relationship with his parents had evolved into something like polite détente. They still saw his academic career as an expensive delay before he came to his senses, and they had never acknowledged Maya's existence despite the success she had achieved. But James had built a life that didn't require their approval, and that independence had given him a kind of peace. I think my parents loved the idea of who they wanted me to be more than they're interested in who I actually am, James said finally. And I've made peace with that. Their approval would be nice, but it's not necessary for my happiness anymore. That's very mature of you. It's very practical of me, James corrected with a grin. I learned from the best. Maya laughed, remembering. The girl who had once been so careful to stay invisible, so afraid of wanting too much. That girl still existed somewhere inside her, but she had been joined by a woman who understood that dreams weren't luxuries, but necessities, that wanting more wasn't selfish, but essential. The phone rang, interrupting their dinner. James reached for it, frowning at the unfamiliar number on the display. Hello? His expression shifted to surprise, then something more complicated. Yes, this is James Whitmore. No, Yes, I can accept the charges. Maya watched James's face change as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. After several minutes of mostly one-sided conversation, he hung up and stared at the phone as if it had transformed into something strange and unpredictable. Who was that? Maya asked. My father. Calling from a payphone at some diner in Massachusetts. James ran a hand through his hair, looking bewildered. He's driving to Boston to meet with lawyers about dissolving the family trust. Maya felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? It means the Whitmore fortune is being redistributed. Charitable donations, employee pension funds, educational scholarships. James looked at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. He said he wanted to call me before the news broke in the financial papers tomorrow. Why would he do that? Dissolve the trust, I mean. James stood and moved to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked city. Apparently, my resignation from the company 5 years ago started him thinking about legacy and purpose. He's been questioning what the family wealth was actually accomplishing, whether it was creating anything meaningful or just perpetuating privilege. Maya joined him at the window, processing this unexpected development. How do you feel about it? Relieved, I think. The trust was always this weight hanging over my life, this expectation that I would someday inherit responsibilities I never wanted. James turned to face her. But Maya, there's more. He's establishing an educational foundation, and he wants me to help run it. You're kidding. Scholarships for first-generation college students, grants for working-class writers and artists, funding for programs that support people transitioning between social classes. James's voice carried a note of wonder. He said he's been reading about income inequality and social mobility, trying to understand how wealth can be used constructively, instead of just accumulated. Maya stared at him. Your father has been reading about social mobility? Apparently, your book played a role in that education. My book? James smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a familiar object, a well-worn copy of Between Worlds with numerous bookmarks and margin notes visible. He bought it 3 months ago, after seeing a review in the Times that mentioned your background and your connection to the family. He called it an enlightening perspective on the realities of class dynamics in contemporary America. Maya took the book from James's hands, flipping through pages marked with careful annotations in handwriting she didn't recognize. He actually read it. He didn't just read it, he studied it. Look at page 47. Maya turned to the indicated page, which contained her story, Service Entrance, a piece about a young woman working as invisible staff in a wealthy household. In the margin, someone had written, I never considered how our comfort depends on other people's invisibility. James, Maya whispered, this is surreal. It gets more surreal. He wants to meet with you. Not as his son's girlfriend, but as an advisor for the foundation. He thinks your insights into the experiences of working-class students could help design more effective programs. Maya sank onto her small couch, overwhelmed by the implications. The same man who wanted me to disappear from your life now wants my professional advice? People change, Maya. Sometimes slowly, sometimes dramatically, but they change. Your stories showed him perspectives he had never considered, experiences he had never acknowledged. Maya thought about all the times she had imagined confronting Mr. Whitmore, telling him exactly what she thought about his assumptions and prejudices. She had never imagined a scenario where he would seek out her opinions and value her expertise. What did you tell him? I told him I would discuss it with you and get back to him. This is your decision, Maya. You don't owe my family anything, regardless of how much they might benefit from your involvement. Maya looked around her apartment, at the books she had collected, the stories she had written, the life she had built. Through her own determination and talent. 5 years ago, she had been the cook's daughter, invisible and voiceless. Now she was being invited to help shape how wealthy families understood their responsibilities to the broader community. You know what the most incredible part of this is? Maya said finally. What? I'm not the same person who would have been grateful just to be noticed. I'm someone who gets to choose whether this opportunity aligns with my values and goals. Maya stood, moving to her bookshelf and pulling out the leather journal James had given her years ago. I've become the person I wrote about in here, someone who learned to fly. James watched her with the same admiration she had seen in his eyes that first night in the library. So what do you think? Are you interested in changing the world from the inside? Maya opened the journal to the last entry she had written. Just the night before, the cook's daughter learned that the most radical thing she could do was not disappear, but instead take up all the space she deserved and use her voice to make room for others like her. I think, Maya said, closing the journal and looking at James with a smile that held 5 years of growth and courage, that I'm ready to find out what happens when the cook's daughter gets invited to redesign the kitchen. Outside, the rain was tapering off, and the city lights reflected in puddles like scattered stars. Maya Shen had spent her childhood learning to be invisible, but she had grown into a woman who understood that true power came not from hiding in shadows, but from stepping into light and making sure others could follow. The girl who had once borrowed books in secret had become a woman who wrote her own stories. And the best part was, she was just getting started. The Whitmore Foundation offices occupied the top floor of a restored brownstone in downtown Hartford, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the Connecticut River. Maya stood at one of those windows, watching boats navigate the autumn currents while she reviewed the final applications for the scholarship program she had helped design. 2 years had passed since that rainy evening when James received his father's unexpected phone call. 2 years of careful negotiation, strategic planning, and the delicate work of transforming generational wealth into generational change. Maya's role had evolved from consultant to program director, overseeing initiatives that supported first-generation college students, working-class artists, and young people caught between worlds, much like she had been. The Martinez application is exceptional, said Sarah Chun, no relation to Maya, despite sharing a surname, who served as the Foundation's grants coordinator. Sarah was herself a beneficiary of the program, having received funding to complete her master's degree in social work after years of supporting her family's restaurant business. Maya looked up from the application she had been reading, that of a young man whose essay about growing up in his family's laundromat had moved her to tears. Rodriguez or Martinez from Phoenix? Phoenix? The one who wants to study engineering but has been managing his family's construction business since his father's injury. Maya nodded, making a note on her evaluation form. Full funding plus the mentorship program. His essay about designing sustainable housing for working families shows exactly the kind of innovation we want to support. This was Maya's favorite. Part of the work, recognizing potential in places where others saw only obstacles. The foundation had funded over 200 students in its first 2 years, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Not just in terms of academic achievement, but in the ripple effects these young people created in their communities. James appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the slightly rumpled look that meant he had been grading undergraduate papers for hours. He was now Dr. James Whitmore, having completed his dissertation on narratives of social mobility in contemporary American literature. Maya's work had been a case study in his research, though she had insisted on being credited as a co-author, rather than simply a subject. "The Yale students want to interview you again," James said, settling into the chair across from Maya's desk. "Something about featuring the foundation in their documentary about wealth redistribution." Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. "What did you tell them?" "That you're busy changing the world and they'll have to wait their turn." Maya smiled, but her attention was caught by movement in the hallway. Richard Whitmore appeared, looking distinguished. In his navy suit but carrying himself with less arrogance than Maya remembered from their encounters years earlier. His transformation had been gradual but genuine, a wealthy man slowly learning to see beyond his own privilege. "Maya, do you have a moment?" Richard asked, his tone respectful rather than commanding. "Of course." Maya gestured to the chair beside James. Over the past 2 years, these conversations had become easier, but she still felt the echo of that 19-year-old girl who had been told to remember her place. Richard settled into the chair, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "I wanted to discuss the expansion proposal with you before presenting it to the board next week." Maya opened the folder, scanning pages of financial projections and program outlines. "California and Texas? The demand is there. We've received over 3,000 inquiries from students on the West Coast alone. And the Texas initiative would focus specifically on supporting young people from immigrant families, an area where your insights would be invaluable." Maya studied the numbers, her mind already working through the logistics of expanding their model to new regions. The mentorship component will be crucial. These students need more than financial support. They need people who understand the cultural navigation required when you're the first in your family to enter higher education. Exactly what I was thinking. Which brings me to my next question. Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. "Maya, I'd like you to consider taking over as executive director of the foundation." Maya looked up sharply. "What about Mrs. Harrison?" "Margaret is ready to retire, and frankly, she's been saying for months that you're already doing the executive director's job. This would simply make it official, with the salary and authority to match." Maya felt James's eyes on her, but she kept her focus on Richard. The offer was generous, more than generous. It represented recognition, security, and the opportunity to expand her impact exponentially. "I'm honored," Maya said carefully, "but I want to make sure this isn't just nepotism disguised as merit." Richard smiled, the expression carrying genuine warmth. "Maya, in 2 years you've increased our program effectiveness by 40%, established partnerships with 12 major universities, and designed evaluation metrics that other foundations are now adopting. If anything, I should have made this offer 6 months ago." James reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. "You deserve this, Maya. You've earned it." Maya thought about the girl who had once hidden in libraries, reading about other people's lives and dreams. That girl could never have imagined sitting in a foundation office, being offered the chance to direct programs that would affect thousands of lives. "I'll need autonomy over program design and hiring decisions," Maya said. "Completely. And I want to establish a creative writing component, grad specifically for working-class writers and storytellers. Consider it done." Maya looked around the office that had become her second home, at the applications covering her desk, at the photos on her wall showing scholarship recipients at their graduations. Then yes, I accept. Richard stood, extending his hand with a smile that seemed to acknowledge how far they had all traveled from their first encounters. Welcome to the executive suite, Director Chun. After Richard left, Maya and James sat in comfortable silence, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Through the window, Maya could see the first hints of winter approaching, bare trees preparing for dormancy before spring's renewal. Director Chun, James said finally, testing the sound of the words. I like how that sounds. It's terrifying, Maya admitted. 3 years ago, I was worried about affording textbooks. Now I'm going to be responsible for managing millions of dollars in grants. And you're exactly the right person for the job. Maya, you understand what these students are going through because you've lived it. You know what they need because you needed it yourself. Maya nodded, then stood and moved to her bookshelf, where her published works now occupied an entire shelf. Beside Between Worlds sat her second collection, Making Space, and several essays published in literary journals. The newest edition was a collaborative anthology she had edited, featuring stories by scholarship recipients about their experiences navigating higher education. James, Maya said softly, do you ever think about that night in the library, when we first met? Every day. What do you think would have happened if I had just put the book back and left? James joined her at the bookshelf, his arms settling around her shoulders. I think we both would have spent years wondering what if. I think you would have found your voice eventually, but it might have taken longer. I think I would have found my courage, but it would have been harder. Maya leaned into his warmth, thinking about all the moments of choice that had led them here. Sometimes I wonder if your mother knew, even then, that this is where we would end up. What do you mean? I mean that she tried so hard to keep us apart, but in the end, our separation just made us both more determined to become who we were meant to be. If she had simply ignored us, we might have settled for less. James considered this. You're suggesting that my mother's opposition actually strengthened our relationship? I'm suggesting that sometimes the people who try to limit us end up teaching us the most about our own power. As if summoned by their conversation, Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Elena's here, Maya announced. She's downstairs with Lola. They made their way to the Foundation's main conference room, where Elena was helping Lola settle into one of the comfortable chairs around the polished table. At 83, Lola moved slowly but with dignity, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the elegant space. Mia, Elena embraced her daughter warmly. You look tired. Are you eating enough? I'm fine, Mama. Just busy with the transition. Lola studied Maya with the piercing gaze that had intimidated neighborhood children for decades. So you're the boss now? I'm going to be, yes. Good. About time they recognize what I've been telling everyone for years. You're the smartest one in any room you enter. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Lola had never been effusive with praise, making her approval all the more precious. Elena pulled out a carefully wrapped package. We brought you something for your new position. Maya unwrapped the gift to reveal a fountain pen, elegant but not ostentatious, with her initials engraved on the barrel. It's beautiful. Every important decision should be signed with intention, Lola said firmly. This pen will remind you that your signature has power. As they settled around the conference table for an early dinner Elena had prepared, Maya looked around at the faces of the people who had shaped her journey. Elena, who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities. Lola, who had taught her that dignity didn't depend on circumstances. James, who had seen her potential before she recognized it herself. I have an announcement, James sighed, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Maya's heart stopped. They had talked about marriage in abstract terms, but always as something that would happen eventually, when their careers were more settled, when the timing was perfect. "Maya Chun," James said, dropping to one knee beside her chair, "you have taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life. It's about building a life with someone who challenges you to become your best self." Maya's hands flew to her mouth as James opened the box to reveal a ring that was elegant in its simplicity. A single stone surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the light like promises. "Will you marry me?" James asked, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Maya looked into the eyes of the man who had believed in her before she believed in herself, who had sacrificed privilege for authenticity, who had spent years proving that his love was about seeing her truly rather than using her symbolically. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena burst into tears of joy while Lola nodded approvingly, as if this outcome had always been inevitable. Later that evening, as they drove back to Maya's apartment, soon to become their apartment, Maya stared at the ring on her finger, still hardly believing the day's events. "Executive director and fiancé in one day," James observed. "How are you processing all of this?" Maya thought about the question seriously. "I'm thinking about that first story I wrote, about the girl who learned to fly. I think I understand now that flying isn't about leaving everything behind. It's about rising high enough to see all the possibilities, then choosing which ones to pursue." "And which possibilities are you choosing?" Maya looked out at the city lights streaming past their window, each one representing a life full of dreams and struggles and potential. "All of them," she said with a smile. "I'm choosing all the possibilities that help other people learn to fly too." 3 months later, Maya stood in the Foundation's conference room, now redecorated to reflect her vision for the organization's future. The walls displayed artwork created by program recipients, and the bookcases held works by authors who had benefited from the Foundation's creative writing grants. She was reviewing applications for the newly expanded West Coast program when her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Chun, there's someone here to see you. She says she's writing an article about social mobility and heard about your work." Maya looked up to see a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22, wearing clothes that spoke of careful budgeting and carrying herself with the particular combination of confidence and uncertainty that Maya recognized immediately. "I'm Carmen Rodriguez," the young woman said, extending her hand. "I'm a journalism student at the State University, and I'm working on my senior thesis about people who've successfully navigated class transitions." Maya gestured for Carmen to sit, seeing something familiar in the young woman's earnest expression. "What specifically interests you about class mobility?" "I'm the first person in my family to go to college," Carmen explained. "My parents clean office buildings at night to pay for my tuition. I keep feeling like I'm living in 2 different worlds, and I want to understand how other people have managed that experience." Maya smiled, remembering another young woman who had felt caught between worlds, who had found solace in stories about people brave enough to cross boundaries. "Well, Carmen," Maya said, settling back in her chair, "let me tell you about a cook's daughter who learned that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to stay invisible." As Maya began to share her story, she caught sight of her reflection in the conference room's large windows. The image showed a successful woman in her mid-20s, engaged to a man who valued her mind and supported her dreams, directing a foundation that had already changed hundreds of lives. But more importantly, it showed someone who had learned that true success wasn't about escaping your origins, it was about transforming them into stepping stones for others to follow. The cook's daughter had indeed learned to fly, and now she was teaching others that they had wings too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.